Carolyn, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here. I'm talking to the world I used to come from. So I never practiced as a clinical counselor. I did practice as a social worker, but not a clinical counselor. But I did work with a number of very fine colleagues of yours in the non-for-profit world, and so I really am appreciative of what you do and how you help all people, and how particularly you can help seniors and the people who care for them. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. Now, normally I would have a little slideshow up there, so it's like my right arm has been chopped off. I don't have my PowerPoint, but I'll hold up the little pictures. So, so this one would say, as the seniors advocate, I'm often asked, who are seniors and what do they want? And I say, well, that's a pretty easy question to ask. But it's a pretty difficult question to answer. And the reason it's difficult to answer is because why don't you just say, who are people and what do they want? The diversity of wants, hopes, needs, dreams, and aspirations of somebody at 65, 85, and 105 are as varied and as different as they are at 15, 25, 45, and 55. The only thing that changes is the way we view people at the age of 75, 85, and 105. And one of the ways I illustrate this is I hold up this picture of Jane and Anne. So what you would see on the left-hand side, I asked people to think back 60 years ago to two 30-year-old women, one named Jane, one named Anne. Jane is the quintessential conformist. So you see the image of the woman in the pearls and sweater set serving the dinner every night, and every morning she gets up and makes breakfast. And throughout her entire life, at every transition point, Jane, the complete conformist, did exactly what was expected of her. She was the little Miss Perfect in school that always had the homework done and the sandwiches neatly wrapped in wax paper. And everywhere along the way, whatever society expected of her in her role as a woman, she did, and she conformed. So, born at the same time, 60 years ago, at the beginning of the Beat generation, was Anne, or Annie, the hippie chick, the iconoclast. The I'm not going to follow anyone's path, I'm going to beat my own path. I'm not the pearl and sweater set, I'm the macrame bikini, and I'm not the hairdo, I'm the free-flowing locks. And at the age of 30, these two women were so obviously different. They were chalk and cheese, they looked different, they dressed differently, they were able to fully express their differences, and we would not for 1 minute think that they wanted to read the same books, watch the same movies, go on the same vacations. But something happened over those ensuing 60 years, and lo and behold, we turn around, and at age 90, Jane, total conservative and conformist, and Annie, totally hippie chick, have morphed into seniors. They look similar now. So, and we've got a label for them that's the same, seniors. So they must want everything that's the same. We might, well, let's just make them roommates. They've got so much. They're still Jane and Anne. The only thing that's different is how we view them. Now, you guys know this, but I'm going to challenge you that you might be surprised at how you label seniors. So if we took any group of people and took one characteristic they shared in common, whether that characteristic is their age, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their socioeconomic status, whatever it is, that one unifying characteristic, we're fine without it. And we started to treat everybody with that one characteristic as having everything in common. Think of what that would do. And that's what stereotyping is. When you take one characteristic that everybody shares, and you assume everything else is shared. And we do that with seniors. And when we create these stereotypes, we create impressions out there, and we form a narrative. And so I like to talk about some of the preconceived notions we have of seniors and the world out there, and what the reality is, because they often look a little bit different. So let's start with this apocalyptic silver tsunami that's going to wash over the world and end it as we know today. And all we're going to be living in is this gray hair people wandering around. Where am I? Where's the home? Who are you? And the whole economy of British Columbia is held up by two guys in a sawmill in Quesnel working 12-hour shifts. Well, you know, funny thing when you look at the numbers. So currently today in British Columbia, actually it's just changed, 19%. 19% of people are age 65 and over. That's almost 2 out of 10. That means 8 out of 10 people are under 65. Not over, under. The vast majority of people are under 65. So it's shifting, we know that. It's going to shift. The apogee of the shift is 25% of our population is going to be over the age of 65. 3/4 are still going to be under 65. So seniors are very clearly a minority. They're a minority today, and they're going to continue to be a minority in the foreseeable future. That's not really the picture we're painting out there. We're trying, you know, we can play, it's an interesting thing we can do with numbers. There's a book out there by Michael Lewis called The Undoing Project, which some of you may or may not have read, and it's all about how you present the numbers. So if you tell somebody that their surgery has a 90% chance of success, you're going to get a different answer than if you tell them it's got a 10% chance of fatality. Right? It's all how you present the numbers. So when we hear, oh, this population's going to double, that yeah, okay, but what are the actual numbers? When you go from 2 to 1, from 1 to 2, pardon me, you've doubled. But you've gone from 1 to 2, and so when we look at the numbers, it looks a little bit different. So let's talk about some of the other stereotypes that are out there. Depending on who you listen to, all seniors are either rich or all seniors are poor. The reality is there's as much diversity in income amongst seniors as there is amongst everybody else. And the challenge is they're not active participants in the labor force. Their income is what it is, right? And so how do you deal from a public policy perspective with the fact that you've got a group of people, they're not going to be participating in the labor force. So all those economic levers we have about getting a job, which is how we fix most low-income issues, doesn't apply to seniors. And you've got 20% of our seniors are living on an average income of $17,000 a year. And 20% of our seniors are living on an average income of $88,000 a year. Big difference. So how do you develop a policy? If everybody gets it, the $88,000 a year people are going to get it, as well as the $17,000 a year people are going to get it. And the pie is only so big. So the choices we have are give a slice to everybody, and it's going to be a pretty teeny tiny slice, or some people don't get a slice, but the ones who do get a slice get a slightly bigger slice. And that's an uncomfortable conversation we're going to have as we move forward in the future. Living, where do people live? So the other notion out there, pardon me, I've got this cold, is everybody's headed to the nursing home, right? The reality is, at age 65, exactly 4% of people live in nursing homes. 96% of the population at the age of 65 lives independently. Now that's the new, whatever, 45. So I look at 85, which is the average age of somebody in a nursing home in this province. At the age of 85 and older, 85 and older, 3/4 of people, 75%, live completely independent. About 10% live in assisted living or retirement living, and 15%, 1/5, of people 85 and older live in a nursing home. And about almost 20% of them don't need to be there, but that's another story for a different audience. Right? But the overwhelming message is to you in this room, to everybody out there, and through you to your clients, you're most likely to live in your own home for all of your life. You may, some will, absolutely, have to go into a nursing home, absolutely. And the likelihood increases with age, absolutely. But statistically speaking, until about the age of 98 or 99, the majority still live independently. It starts to slip a bit, but it's still the majority live independently. The other notion that's out there is that if you live long enough, you're going to lose your marbles. Right? We're all going to be doddering around, and you see a person with a gray hair, and they're looking at the pin pad at Safeway, and you go, uh-oh. The reality is, and this is where numbers, how you present them. So, you can say, as they did to me, 20% of people over the age of 85 have a diagnosis of dementia. You know, 1 out of 5 people over the age of 85 has a diagnosis of dementia. Okay, well that means 8 out of 10 don't. And I'm pretty sure that's the story, because I think people think everybody over 85 has a diagnosis of dementia. Even the 20%, 80% argument. So my colleagues at the ministry, because they like everything in nice little tied up bows, right? How are you going to measure? So what I say is, people are worried about whether they're going to get it or not, and what's the likelihood of getting it. So the measurement of that is taken by saying, on any given day, how many people in the province have a diagnosis of dementia? That number's 20%, over 85, right, 20%. The ministry, in its numbers, says in a given year how many people are diagnosed. But the population is not static for that year. So its number is a little bit higher. I think it comes in at about 25%. But it's not 20, you don't have it, it's not 25% of people aged 85 and over. Because you can't be a people if you're dead, to put it bluntly, right? But we don't think about that when we're putting the numbers out there. Now, these are some of the challenges. It's not, these aren't straight. We want to generate a lot of support for research in Alzheimer's and dementia, and we should. Anybody who's experienced somebody either professionally or personally in their lives who has had a dementia, particularly Alzheimer's, knows how horrific it is and that it affects, there are many victims of Alzheimer's, not just the person who is afflicted. And we do need a cure, and it's one of those things where we need a cure tomorrow, but we need care today. So we need a lot of money. And I hate to tell you, but we might stumble upon something, but we're a long way from a cure. Okay? So we're desperate to do, but the unintended consequence of that is we've created this impression or this image or this fear amongst people that they're going to get it. And you might see this, I don't know how many of you in your practice have some seniors, or you might have the children of the seniors who are wondering about, you know, mom and her mind, and it is the insidious effect it has on a person's confidence if they think they're going to lose their mind. And as a clinical community, how you're going to treat somebody if you think they've lost their mind. And you know, one of the big differences is we still, I think, are misdiagnosing and confusing mental illness and dementia. I do not believe that dementia is a mental illness. Some people want to put it all together. No. To me, the issue is you can develop a mental illness at any age. If you develop it at 85, we are not doing a good service if we are attributing that to dementia, because it is a totally different treatment modality. It is a totally different road you travel down than you would if you were treating somebody with mental illness, either pharmacologically or therapeutically. So we need to think about that, and we need to remember, you know, you know how they teach you zebras and horses, right? If you think if you hear hoofs clopping away in the background, think horses, not zebras, right? The most likely, Occam's razor, the most likely explanation is the simplest one. Well, what if dementia is the zebra, not the horse, right? And the statistics would tend to back that up, but that's not what we think. Emergency department use. So the other image we have portray out there among seniors is they're clogging up the emergency departments, and that's why nobody can get the help they need. Blaming them, in other words. But in fact, in this province, less than 25% of the people in the emergency department are over the age of 65, and only 6% are over the age of 85. So if all your problems are caused by 6% of your patients, you know, you got to think about that, right? The fact is, it's not. That's not who's clogging up our emergency department. But again, it perpetuates this image. Living alone, one of the things we need to remember is at age 65, a quarter of the population already lives alone. Many do it by choice. I mean, I'm singing to the choir, I think is what we say. I mean, you know that people, we all have social needs, but what it takes to satisfy that need is different for everybody. And so daily contact is not necessary for some people, and hourly contact is necessary for other people in order to satisfy that sense of belonging and social need. So we need to remember that we can't just paint every senior that's living alone as isolated and lonely, because the reality is that it is true that isolation and loneliness, living alone, can be a contributing factor, but not necessarily. When we did our survey of residential care facilities in the province, we went to all facilities, we asked everybody a whole bunch of questions. And a bunch of questions we asked went to the isolation and loneliness factor. And what's interesting is that half the people in our care facilities in this province, they live with other people all the time, but they still feel isolated and lonely. I mean, you know that from your clients, the people who, it's the way society makes them feel, or their family makes them feel. I don't feel useful, I don't feel I'm contributing, nobody asks me my opinion. You can be surrounded by other people and be made to feel that way, and you'd actually be better off alone than with people who are made. And so we have to think about not just there need to be conversations, but what those conversations need to be. Percentage that are employed, it's growing, it's going to continue to grow. I don't think this is a bad thing. I mean, there's people who want to say, oh, this is awful, people, you know, at 65 having to still work. Well, we'll just wait a minute here. Don't assume they have to work. First of all, we have a social safety net, or it might be inadequate, fair enough. But the social safety net that is there for a person of any age who is unable to work, right? So if you're not able to work, in fact, the social safety net's a little bit better at 65 than it is at 64. Because if you're a person with disabilities at 64, if you're not able to work at all, your income goes up by about $200 to $300 a month when you turn 65, because you get OAS and GIS, right? If you were earning money, it looks a little bit different, but there is that social safety net there. But what I hear more about are seniors who want to continue to work, but feel that society is not welcoming them in the workforce. And you know, it's 1993, so however many years ago that was. I did my master's thesis, and I did it on, Carolyn will believe this because she knows me from my previous life, sick leave utilization. How are we going to get these people back to work? Sick leave utilization in the home sport industry. And so back in those days, there was the ability to have mandatory retirement, but there was never mandatory retirement. You could, as an employer, you were free to let people work as long as you wanted. The change that happened was the law said you could not force people to retire at 65 as an employer. Anyhow, so there were 300 observations in this study, and I still remember this. One observation, because we did, you know, the usual, what's your age, where, you know, all blah, 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 blah. 70 years of age, as a we still called them home support workers back then, not homemakers. Working full-time for a year, not one single sick day. So of course the image is, don't hire the older workers because they're going to be sick all the time. No. The evidence does not actually support that, right? There is some evidence to suggest that they may need to be off, you know, they are more likely to need a surgical but those are generally planned. But the episodic absences that you see, you don't see those. It's systematically, it's not there. And then the percentage that volunteer. So seniors donate the most hours of any age cohort, volunteer hours of any age cohort. Now, here's the interesting thing. The only reason why, as a percentage, of people who volunteer, the age 65 and over isn't the highest number of people who volunteer, percentage, they give more hours, is because when we're 40 years old, we actually count taking our kids to baseball as volunteering. Now, I kind of thought that was about being a parent, but my husband would still refer to himself as babysitting our children, right? Yeah, think about that. Yeah, I know. So, but the message is that seniors are working and they're prolific volunteers. So if, and one of the examples I give is that in this province, in any given year, $10 million is raised by seniors who are 98% of the people in our hospital auxiliaries. And that's to fund hospital services for all ages, right? Not just seniors. And so, you know, the takeaway message is, let's stop beating up on seniors and saying what a problem they are and how they're a cost curve to be bent, and all the problems in healthcare are because of seniors, and apparently Andrew Coyne was out at Mary Winspear the other night talking about, you know, the biggest challenge that lies ahead is the aging population and the shifting, you know, that it is a bit of a bandwagon, and like all bandwagons, a bunch of people jump on, and I could give you a litany of historical references to bandwagons we jumped on, including sending kids to residential schools, that has proven to not be the best of public policy issues or really the reality that was out there, right? And so I think this seniors population is one of them. There is no doubt there is a shift from a population that is going to need support and the percentage of population that's contributing to the taxes to support them. That is happening. The degree to which it's happening and the drama of the shift, I think, is being completely overplayed. In part, we're going to get there very incrementally, right? So this shift from 19% to 25% is happening over the next 13 years. So we're going to go from 19% to 25%, pardon me, but we're going to have 13 years to do it. So I think we can plan for that, right? And if you look around the world, there's other jurisdictions like Japan, Italy. Well, Japan's already at 26%. Italy's at about 22, 23%, and even in the Maritimes in this country, they're up over the 20% of their population over the age of 65, and nobody's ceiling has fallen in or world has collapsed from what I can tell. So, you know, we can maybe dial it down. Now, one of the things I particularly want to talk to the clinical counselors of BC about is the issue of caregiving, and something that you may see in your practice, and a discussion that I think we need to have. So 1 out of 4 British Columbians identifies themselves as a caregiver. There's a lot of ideas, information, data being thrown around out there based on, you know, a survey here and a survey there. We do have some really hard data about caregivers for a particular subset of our seniors population, and those are the 30,000 seniors in the province who are in receipt of our home support services, so the more frail and vulnerable living at home. And what we have been finding, and this is not a surprise, I think, it's what most people think is happening, and sometimes what people think is happening and what's actually happening aren't the same, and sometimes they are the same. And that's why we look at the numbers and see if they match what people are saying. So one of the things that the numbers are telling us very clearly is that who we're caring for in the community in their own homes is rising. So I would have this neat little slide here that would show, because I'm going to throw out some numbers, so it's going to be a bit numbing at the moment, but maybe I'll package it a little bit differently. So if we look at aggressive behavior, an increase in physical, an increase in aggression, a decrease in physical function, cognitive impairment, difficulty managing medication, and qualifying based on physical needs for placement in long-term care. Okay, if we look at all of those, in every single one of those areas over the last 2 years, there has been a 4 to 7% increase. Right? So what that tells us is these people we're caring for at home, 96% of them have a family member, an unpaid caregiver in their life, which is how they can stay at home. Their complexity is rising. When we look at the caregiver distress, guess what? It's rising, right? So it's risen 7% in the last 2 years, and we measure that. We have a report we're going to put out every 2 years. Let's go look at these. When we look at the supports we provide to caregivers, which is adult day programs, respite beds, and home support services, it's been decreasing. So that's why, you know, offices like mine exist to say to the government, and governments, the previous one and this one are no different in that they really do care. How they do things might be a little bit different, but nobody doesn't care who gets into government. And so, you know, wait a minute, the fault lines are beginning to show here, and if we're not careful, I mean, everybody isn't going to tune down, but we are seeing people going into residential care, and that person's condition hasn't changed in the last 3 years. What's changed is the caregiver's given up, and we could get some more support in there and be more helpful. Now, one of the biggest challenges, I think, that is out there in society, and I've got it, if I had a slide deck up here, my final slide would be the clinical counseling community, serving, a little ellipse there, seniors, the people who care for them, and managing the conflict. There is a huge conflict. And we have got to talk about it, and there is no perfect answer. And the conflict is my right to live at home on my own, and your right as my daughter to live free from the burdens of caring for you. Everybody comes to the role of caregiver differently equipped. So one of the stunning takeaways is when we look at the 31% of caregivers in distress, is that 69% aren't. And they're caring for the same people. So what gives? Well, it's different. So, you know, we can talk about, well, you know, because they have money. The reality is, if we all want to be really honest, we are different people. And some of us are able to cope with caregiving from a physical perspective better than others. That's part of it. Emotional perspective. Some people cannot emotionally deal. They could care for somebody else's mother. They can't care. You know, I had a friend who, she was describing her mother, feisty old bird. I kind of liked it. So I said to her, I said, I kind of like your mother. And Deb said, I'd like her too if she was your mother. So, but we got to have this conversation, because here's what the data tell us, right? I'm going to throw out two kind of discomforting pieces of, so when we went and did this residential care survey, we said to every resident, do you want to be here? 40% don't want to be there. We also surveyed family members. We got lots of responses, by the way. There's over 10,000 responses from residents and over 10,000 from family members, so this is reliable. So we said to the family members, do you think your loved one wants to be here? To be fair, most of them got it. About 34% recognized, no, mom doesn't want to be here. Then we said, do you want your loved one to be here? 96% wanted it, right? When we survey in the community, we ask the home care client, you know, is this where you want to be? You know, do you think this is the best place for you? It's a bit of a proxy for seeing if they're ready to move to a care facility. And interestingly enough, about 20% actually don't want to live at home. So it's also a myth to say everybody wants, you know, everybody in this room, nobody wants to go to residential care at this point in your life. What you don't know is, when you get to a certain point, I should clarify, if you get to a certain point where your function has deteriorated, some of you actually will prefer a secure environment to the home environment. Not the majority, but some will. So about 20% say, no, I'd rather be somewhere else. When we ask their caregiver, and when the caregiver is the adult child, it's about 48%, right? There's just a huge, we got to talk about it. So what, part of it is we have got to be better equipped to understand and deal with risk, and God save us from the hand-wringing case manager, daughter, nurse, social worker, who are trained to, actually social workers are a little bit better, right, because it's about building capacity, you said, right, it's about giving them the tools to be, and tolerating eccentricity, right word. In nursing, you're trained to mitigate risk to zero, or as close to zero as you can, right? It's all about, and so we can't tolerate this risk. And so think about, you know, I give an example of the old guy, 93 years old, he's been widowed for a couple of years, and he lives in a 2-story house, and he goes up to his bed every night that he put his head on the pillow of for the last 67 years, and in comes hand-wringing daughter, high-functioning, usually they go hand in glove. I had them on the other end of the phone for a lot of years. I don't have to do that anymore, or ever respond to another RFP. And brings along the case manager for reinforcement and says, you know, Dad, this is ridiculous that you're going tomorrow. You're going to fall, you're going to fracture your hip, you're going to go to the hospital, and you're going to die. Tell him, Jane, he's going to die, right? Well, yes, you know, Mr. Schloss, actually, the data show that the likelihood is at your age, you know, with hospitalization, we have 24%, So, Dad, and the other thing is you're not eating properly, you know, and if you don't eat properly and you don't have enough fluids, you're going to dehydrate. That's what Jane told me. And if you dehydrate, you're going to faint, you're going to fall, you're going to fracture your hip, you're going to go to the hospital, and you're going to die. Isn't that right? Well, yes, well, you know, yes, you are nutritionally compromised. We do know that. And we do know that the likelihood of, you know, dehydration increases the likelihood of syncope, which will, of course, increase the likelihood of a fall, which will, of course, be a problem. So up comes the brochure. Right? And I realize nobody calls it sunset gardens, right? It's all sunrise gardens, right, Dad? Yeah, nobody calls it sunset. So, you know, a dawning of a new day. It's a lifestyle, right? And they got the pictures of the, you know, the laughing people on the bicycle. You gotta go here. Dad, it is for you. It is everything. Everything will be taken care of. They're gonna feed you. You're not gonna worry about falls. It's gonna be great. So he says to his daughter, so Sarah, I go to this assisted living place of yours. I'm not going to die? Right? That's what we're not comfortable with. You know, I have to laugh. We've got this great brouhaha out there about this medical assistance in dying. We have not come to terms with unassisted dying. Right? So you know, it is, you can imagine my sort of stunned reaction when we're all running around in the healthcare system going down this road to do everything we can to facilitate medical assistance in dying, right? Okay, we got that, it's the law, and there's some real zealots over there, oh, all right. And then we're running down this same road over it. This just won't do, you can't live at risk. You're at risk. Okay, well, I think I'm pretty much at risk of dying over, like, whose life is it anyhow, right? And we've got, and you know the difficult part, and you will know this, as sons and daughters, and from your practice. Most people, not all, most people love their mums and dads. And they want to hang on to whatever little sliver of them they can for as long as they can. And they're perfectly happy if that little sliver is going every Sunday to visit them for dinner. Right? That's not what mom or dad want. Sometimes it is, and it all works out, right? And so I don't know what the answer is. But we're going to have to come to a better appreciation of that. Now, it may be that there's a whole generational shift coming up, because, you know, the generation that's coming up, our generation, we've hired people to do everything for us all of our lives, right? We've hired people to clean our houses, watch our kids. The 85, 90, and 95 years old of the people of today, particularly of the women who want to live independently, they've done everything. They did everything. Right? And they associate their sense of worth with those tasks we want to relieve them of doing, right? I relieved myself of doing them 20 years ago. I had no intent of repatriating them. And it does not impact my sense of self-worth at all to cook dinner or clean up afterwards. But there are a lot of people for whom that's the purpose. And we got to think about, so what happens when we take that away? Right? Because we think it's what they need. It's not what they want. You need a purpose to every day. And what changes, particularly frail seniors, so I'm not talking about the 75 or 80-year-old. I mean, in my world, you're not really old till you're way over 95. And so that's the point at which, you know, what can you do? Like, you've got to be able to do, let people do what they want to do. One of the things that was really a bit heartbreaking in the survey, because there was lots in the survey in residential care of things we actually can fix. A lot of things were about putting more staff in, being more flexible. This was the one. Nobody asked for my advice. Right? So we say to them, does anybody ever ask for your advice? Like 50%. No, nobody ever asks my advice on something. So why did we stop asking? Why would we not ask somebody with more experience than we have by definition their advice on something? Anyhow. So those are my thoughts that I leave you with. Now the end slide would be all the contact information in the website, and you can go there and there's lots of reports. For your practice, the one that I would recommend you look at the most is the caregiver distress report. There's two of them. There's the original one and the updated one, because I think that is something that you are likely to see. Not probably from the senior, but from the adult children, the people who are feeling the burden. And hopefully some of what I've shared with you today can give you a broader context through which to view some of those challenges. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them.
Could you give that website verbally?
Sure, it's seniorsAdvocatebc.ca. And what I will leave this with Carolyn.
I'll have it up here, we can get it afterwards.
And in fact, I can leave, if you want that slideshow on your laptop, just take it from that thing, and you're welcome to distribute it.
Okay.
And you can see all, pardon me, all the numbers.
Can we get that back to you later?
Yep, yep. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? We probably have time for one or two questions. Anybody have questions? I think, Isabel, what you've helped us do is probably dispel some of the myths, for sure. Probably as children, as I'm thinking about my own experience over the last 2 years with my mom and my stepfather, and help frame some questions that might be useful as we go into clinical work with our clients. That what kind of questions, how to think about them a little bit differently when you've got the people right in front of you. So I think that's very helpful. Kevin, through a question.
Has it, Ministry of Children and Families uses a process called family group decision making or family group conferencing.
Yep, I know well. Yep.
Other countries have actually used that for seniors. I don't see it catching on here very much, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas as to how it could. And basically, it's bringing the family instead of, right? You know,
we do family care conferences for seniors. We do in the community, and we do it in long-term care as well. One of the challenges is we'll have the family care conference without the senior. That's one of the challenges. And I go back, well, to be fair, you see it in child welfare practice as well. I mean, you see the pull between families that want to repatriate their children and our fear that they are at risk. I mean, to be fair, we see that tension not on the other end of the age spectrum. But there is that, the tension in the family care. But we do, in the home and community care system, there is case conferencing. And you know, it's interesting because I'm reflecting on a personal experience of a case conference held about a senior in a hospital. And I was part of the family. And, oh yeah, we're going to have a case conference to decide what to do about your mom. And then, okay, I'm waiting to be told when it is and where it is, right? But none of us were included in that. It was all the clinicians, none of whom know about that, right? We do a terrible job in the medical community. We give lip service to patient involvement. So what do? We create a patient voices network. Okay, sounds great. We've done that. Check. Then we have a meeting, at every meeting, do we have a patient rep? One, great, check. Okay, when you have one person at a meeting, you have one person's opinion, number one. And number two, the phenomenon that happens, and I've seen it, and you might have seen it or experienced it or been co-opted, is when you are one citizen at a table with 10 bureaucrats, yeah, you get co-opted, which often happens. So then you get, you know, well, we had a patient rep at the table and they thought it was great. Right?
Is the Indigenous community represented in the 10,000 patients and family members that you?
Very, 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 very small percentage of the Indigenous population is in residential care. A few reasons. Number one, the Indigenous population as a percentage of the population is small. Number two, the appalling life expectancy numbers on our Indigenous population. Number three, on the more positive side, is the Indigenous population do tend to take care of elders within their own community and multi-generations living in a house. So they are underrepresented even as a percentage of the population in the province, in long-term care in the province.
So is there a part of that message that is actually useful for the general population?
Yeah. Yeah. Living, I mean, I think the intergenerationality of First Nations is, I think, a good message. Under one of the things that First Nations seniors get that other seniors don't get, they do get a set of services funded for them that I think all seniors should have. It isn't clear that that has led, when you look at the evidence, to frankly it hasn't led to any better health outcomes at the end of the day. But that's because we've got this whole, the Indigenous population, it's the upfront. I mean, there's a point at which how you lived your first, for you and me, 70 years is going to really impact our last 30 years. For the Indigenous population, it's how you lived your first 40 years is going to impact your next 15 years, right? Yeah.
Hi.
Could you stand just so we can hear you? Thank you.
I'm in private practice, and what I find is that once people retire, they don't have access to extended health services, they don't have access to mental health services unless it's within the system. And so I just wondered if there was any insight as to what support there is now for mental health and how that's being addressed. Because certainly the certified health authorities.
The short answer is there's not very much. So one of the, you've identified one of the issues, which is in the general population that's working, many, not all workplaces, offer benefits programs that actually offers access to, one of many things, clinical counseling. And when people retire, either the benefits are not available or they have to pay for the benefit package, and some opt not to pay for it, and so they're cut off from those services. I think we are going to have to explore how we can have some provincial program that people can buy. I mean, it only makes sense to me that if I go out and want to purchase a package, a benefits package, and it's $200 because I'm going out as Isobel with my one thing, that if the province went out and said, we'll buy, you know, what will you charge if, you know, 1 million people are brought to the table, it's going to be less than $200, and somehow bring it down, I don't know. But we've got to do, I think, a better job of helping seniors understand the role of counseling. I think upcoming generations are going to be better at that because they've come up during an era when it's been talked about more. But for the next 10 years, maybe 15 years, we're still going to be dealing with a group of people who never heard of a physiotherapist, actually. They never heard of a counselor, a clinical counselor. They never heard of this. So it's how do we loop them in? And I think we've got to do a better job of understanding a person can develop a mental illness at any age. They don't, you know, there's this theory that it's undiagnosed, so, well, they've been crazy. Whoa, just a minute. You can have no mental illness and be completely fully functional, and then at the age of 80, develop, just like you can at the age of 40, a mental illness, and we're doing a very, very poor job of that.
And sorry, just to well, and also just in terms of you know, supporting and advocating and going to case conferences, there's no way of supporting us to go.
That's a good. That is a good point. Yeah.
So even if we're paying, it's not like a physician that can bill or a psychologist that can bill. We can't bill healthcare systems, for example.
Yeah.
Until we're part of.
Maybe when we're published.
Yeah, and I do, I mean, I think that is something that your profession, I mean, obviously you're moving in that direction of getting under, trying to, and you know, the more, money always talks with the government, frankly, any government. And so, you know, I hate to sound maudlin about it, but the winds of change are actually in your favor in the sense that with the proliferation of issues in the mental health field, there's a very compelling economic argument to the intervention of clinical counseling at a much earlier stage, right? So
We'll quote you on that.
Okay.
One more question and then we will have to say farewell.
I haven't seen the caregiver distress survey, but I was curious, probably one of the distressors would be financial. And I know in Washington State they have paid caregivers, so they actually are able to kind of mitigate that stress. And I don't know if they're still doing that or if Washington State's been looked at, but I worked in that system for a number of years and that was part of the goal, is that caregivers, even if they were family members, and in fact it was actually preferred, and many family members prefer to be the one to stay at home with their loved one, and they're paid to stay at home with their loved one, and it wasn't misused that much.
we have a version of that here, but we've of course frustrated it with a lot of red tape. So obviously there's the public system where it's an unknown paid caregiver who comes in, so there's that. We have a self-directed funding model called CECL, Choices for Supports and Independent Living, where you can get paid. So if you get assessed as needing 3 visits a day, we'll fund you $30 an hour, $90 a day, and you can get the help yourself. We excluded you from being able to hire family members. I remember this painfully. It was a client of ours. She was an MS client. She actually just died a couple of years ago. Her husband cared for her. We were the paid caregivers. We couldn't do anything right because he had no interest in it working. He wanted to care for her, quit his job, but right? He took it to human rights. There was a human rights decision in the province. He said it's discrimination based on family status, and he won, actually. Well, yeah, it's the government. It's the government. Wait, they're going to get the last say. So now the regulations are very convoluted, and if you can prove that nobody else can do it and all this kind of stuff, you can hire the family member. But we basically don't even talk about the self-directed funding anymore. But I think that you're quite right, that the evidence supports, every once in a while, there's going to be some case where, well, guess what? When you pay non-family caregivers to care for you, there's going to be times when it all goes pear-shaped as well, right? It's not a guarantee. So I'm going to be coming out with a report on home support in the next probably month and a half, and that's going to be one of the themes, is this self-directed funding and removing the restrictions on who you can hire.
So we will